And welcome to the February 2022 edition of Hi LBc, a production of the Long Beach Collective Association in Cannabis Capital. And tonight we are here to talk about cannabis education as a topic. We're here to represent an industry, to do it with a best practice mindset. And so tonight we have two founders of different businesses that are licensed, pardon me, I shouldn't say that, one person who works with license holders in the city of Long Beach and one person who's established a licensed extraction business in the city of Long Beach. So I'm going to introduce Stacy Laux, who is the founder and CEO of Beyond the License, which is a consulting service that helps people turnkey into operations in the legislative environment that is Long Beach and also the state of California, and to get all that in place. And then we also have the co-founder and CMO of Optimal Genetics, Mr. Tyler Fischel, and the two of them here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
And Stacey, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask Tyler to start first on this, but this is where I think what we're talking about tonight as a topic is going to be what it takes to not only found, start, and get something up and running, but what it takes to actually function as a licensed operator in the cannabis industry in 2022 in an ever-evolving climate of regulatory oversight, but also consumer interaction, so on and so forth. So Tyler, dig in really quickly. Tell people about Optimal Genetics first and foremost, and kind of how the road that led you to starting the company and getting the license, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So Optimal Genetics was founded by myself and a couple of my friends back in 2016. We were in the Prop 215 days, and we wanted to purchase a product at the dispensaries that we actually liked for a reasonable price. So we set out to start seeing what we can do in the cannabis industry. We started looking at cultivation at first. I was working at a cultivation facility. One of my friends was, doing his thing at home, growing his own personal stuff. So we decided that we wanted to grow. And we started looking at places, and it's just there's a lot of money that comes, and a lot of money that you need to be able to start, especially a cultivation facility, but realistically any facility. And we didn't realize that. We thought it was, we've done this before, we could build it out and just do it. But once we got into the political side and really understanding what we needed to do for a cultivation facility, it was a little bit out of our league. So then we looked into starting a brand. And at the time, cartridges were 65% of the California market, and so we decided to start a manufacturing facility. So that's when we started looking into different cities in California and seeing, where we would fit. And we ended up choosing Long Beach, and really didn't know what we were going to do at the time until we started diving into the political aspects a little bit more on a local level. So we applied for a manufacturing license, and 3 years later, we are up and running. And obviously, there's a lot that came between that and our starting date, but it just came down to really getting involved with the planners of the city and being involved with their schedule and pushing them to help us, because cannabis is such a new industry, especially on the political level. No one really knows what's going on.
Right, people are working without a roadmap, so to speak.
Exactly.
And you're a pioneer in that way. So I got to ask you, just tell me really quickly, you do extraction or do you do production and manufacturing? Tell us a little bit about your product really quick, so then I'm going to have Stacy get a little bit of insight as well as what she does.
Yeah, so we do extraction right now. We do a lot of distillate extraction, as well as helping people remove impurities from their products. So we help a lot of other brands out, taking pesticides or heavy metals out. And our brand is Cured Resin Cartridge line. We have a couple flavors that are in the Long Beach dispensaries mainly, and kind of a one-man team, so I'm working on dispatching out into other counties. But Cured Resin Cartridge, we have 3 flavors, an OG, a sativa, which is my favorite, the orange creamsicle, and then we have a hybrid, the purple pineapple express.
All right, I got you. So 6 years later, you're actually living the dream. Amen.
Exactly.
So Stacy Laux, if you wouldn't mind doing what Tyler just did and give the audience a little bit of insight to what Beyond the License does as a consultative service. Talk a little bit about your background in the Prop 215 compliant era with TKO and some of what you did there, and I'd love to hear your story as well for everybody.
Sure. So my husband and I founded TKO Edibles in 2011 in the Prop 215 era, and did pretty well. We were in that era, the 215 era, up until Prop 64 passed. And then we decided it was time to get licensed, come out of the shadows, do it all the right way. So we shut down for a year and went after our license in Long Beach. We had always been a Long Beach business. The facility that we had on Anaheim, we had that in our 215 era, and then also in the licensed phase. And getting licensed is kind of like being pregnant for 2 years. And so during that time, we had been doing some consulting for about 3 or 4 years. And then in 2019, got licensed. Right after that, we sold the business about a year later and decided we just wanted to do consulting full time. That's what Beyond the License is help you get your license. We can do applications and those kind of things, but also keep your license, be compliant, help you build your facility, help you do a product launch, help you do formulations. Homogeneity is an issue, potency is an issue. Big part of our business is contract manufacturing and placing people with contract manufacturers. So if you have a product that you want to make, I spoke to a wonderful lady tonight, has a vegan edible line and is looking for her next step. What's her path? Do you want to spend $100,000 plus, which trust me, it's plus, probably add a zero to that, to build out a facility, $6,000 for licensing, all the other expenses. Now you need a staff, you need a bookkeeper, you need a compliance person, you need all those other factors. So what we do is we try and place people with a product with the right facility for them. So they can immediately, like in a few months from concept to SKU, they're in the dispensaries. And a place where maybe some of the equipment's already there, maybe some of the staff is already there, the infrastructure's there. So we match people with the right facility for them so that they can get their product to market without being pregnant for 2 years. And then we make sure that it's a match, that it's also a compliant facility. We go in and we do an audit, make sure that we're not putting you in a place that's not going to be successful for you. So it's a long process, and there's a lot of moving parts. For example, the state was in this week doing inspections on manufacturing and distribution. That is an all hands on deck crazy time for any operator who's ever gone through an inspection. So that's what we do, is try and go in and
Can I
help
ask you a
them.
quick question for
Yeah.
the audience? How long do those inspections generally last in terms of actual duration of time?
So the main one I did this week, we did a few this week, it was 50 hours of prep time. That means that's how long we had to work with them, literally till 2 o'clock in the morning, getting them ready. The actual inspection was 2.5 hours long. And that's like, let's go back to the pregnancy, that's like being pregnant, that's like being in labor for 2.5 days. It's a lot. So 2.5 hours is a very long inspection. If you're ready, you're ready. If you're not, I mean, they're not jerks. They really try and work with you unless you have a really blatant problem. But we want them to come in and say, this is awesome. And then they're not going to be nitpicking all the little details. So we try and go in and make sure that that's a smooth 2.5 hours for them. Smaller facilities, maybe you could do it in an hour and a half, but especially if you have manufacturing and distribution, because there's not only making sure they're both compliant, but the interaction between the two is also very important.
And so, Tyler, have you been through one of those inspections yet at your facility, besides the one that gave you your certificate of occupancy and so forth and your license?
We have not. I know Stacy did let me know that they were in town, and we're always prepared, and we cross our T's and dot our I's always, but we have not gone through that yet.
So, you were talking about that. All right, so when you got to Long Beach and you actually submitted your application and everything, can you walk us through a little bit of what that process was like on the front end for people who don't know? Also, what it took for you to get a certificate of occupancy and put, the equipment in place to actually do what you're doing today?
Yeah, to be honest with you, we relied a lot on our contractors actually rebuilding the building to be able to help us communicate with the planners of the city. Like I mentioned before, it's so new that even the planners and these people that are, enforcing these regulations don't really know what's going on, and their communication in the city hall it's not proper. And so what we had to do is literally write out every single point that we needed, communicate that to one planner, and then move on to the next planner and say, hey, this is exactly what this person said, this is what we need to do, and they don't really know what's going on. So we had to almost babysit the entire process when it came to actually getting the building up and running in a reasonable amount of time. I know I'm sure Stacy does too, there's a lot of licensees who spend years getting up and running, and that means having a facility, paying rent on a facility that is non-operable, and almost digging yourself into a hole while trying to make yourself successful in an ever-changing industry. As we get older in this industry, we learn new things.
More mature, right, as an industry.
Correct.
So the question then I would have for you two, and I don't know which one of you will want to answer this, is so how much of this process in the front end is traditional? Like if I wanted to open a bookstore, I wanted to open a restaurant, I wanted to open whatever, right? 75% of it, 60% of it, and the other 40% is cannabis related?
So the rules for cannabis are insane. The rules that are needed to be followed. So distillation, which you do at your facility, with cannabis is the same thing as vanilla extract. But he's going to blow up the block, and vanilla extract company is not. So the regulations and the guidelines that a cannabis business has to follow, from GMP, which is general good manufacturing practices, which is your signs and your gloves and your hairnets and all that stuff, way stricter in cannabis. Pesticide testing, for example, organic Oreos fail in the cannabis industry. So all the regulations are
I'm sorry, did you say organic Oreos?
Organic Cheerios.
Oh, Cheerios.
Nobody eats
Fail a
organic Oreos,
cannabis
just eat
test?
that.
You're saying it would fail a cannabis test for quality and
That's crazy.
Yeah, no, so yes, organic Cheerios fail. Anyway, so all the restrictions when it comes to cannabis are stricter. Everything you purchase when it comes to cannabis is stricter. If you want a vessel that does a certain thing in extraction that is for a totally different industry, it's $1,500. If it's for cannabis, it's $10,000. And so that is every single step you make in this process, from the planning to the drawings to the fire to the health to testing to your application. I mean, if you want to open, I've opened many businesses in my life. It's like 3 pages. My cannabis application is that thick. And it's nowhere near, nobody ever has to do that. I've never seen even pharmaceutical, nutraceutical have to go to that extreme. So the process is, and it's that not just Long Beach. Long Beach is actually one of the nicer cities to do it in. It's the cannabis industry as a whole. It's just extremely difficult. Can it be done? Yes, but you need someone to guide you through it.
how much of it is local and how much is in state regulation, by the way? Because I know for the local regulatory authority, that's always going to be building permits and plan checks and things of that nature. But then the state comes into this process as well?
They do. City is going to be more concerned with health and safety, especially fire. They're going to be extremely strict on fire. Your state inspectors are not even really going to know, for the most part, when they come in, is your explosion-proof pod compliant? Is this compliant? They're going to be more concerned about product flow, potential diversion. Are you following all your rules? Is there any? They will care about health in the fact that they want to make sure you're not going to have a contaminated product that makes someone sick, but they're not going to come in and test the water temperature in your sinks. Is this drain the proper flow, pitch, all those kind of things? That's more your city. State is more concerned about you following the cannabis rules. Nobody's getting high
Once you're in
diversion.
operation.
Correct.
Once you're in operation. So Tyler, you mentioned that you worked with contractors. Were these people who specialized in cannabis industry construction or traditional? And if so, what did they tell you about the experience? Did they say, wow, this took 6 months longer than I thought it would? Did they tell you, what was that about and how did they react to it?
Yeah, our contractors are just normal construction contractors that we knew through some family friends, and they were willing to help us out. And they really had no part with the planning. I mean, they had engineers on site that would help us, and they would help us draw out the plans, and then we would be able to take those over to the city.
No,
planning.
Understood, but they were waiting for you to get a check.
Yeah,
or a plan,
absolutely.
Right? So that's where I'm trying
It
to
was
get at.
weeks. There was a couple times where we would wait a couple weeks, and they're like, "Hey, like, what's up? We haven't done anything on the building in 2 weeks. What's going on?" And we're like, "Hey, we're at the whim of the city. They haven't approved this yet. Once they approve it, then we can get going." And it was almost there was a couple times where it was like, "Okay, we're good to go," and then a week later, it's like, "Oh, now they want us to do this." So I would say that that's a common. Would you say that that's a common thing in the industry? It's like, "Yeah, you're good to go. Just knock these out," and then they'll add 2 more check boxes to your list.
Let me just throw something in real quick. I did choose to use a cannabis-specific contractor, still do, someone I've used for 10 years. I think it makes a big difference. It's not a necessary necessity, but I think it made a big difference because they understand the pod, they understand fire, they understand the special idiosyncrasies about cannabis, and they've also been up against it, with the other 20 buildings they've done in the last 10 years. So I think there is some advantage to that. Not necessary, but helps.
And I got to ask you then, so Tyler, did you have an experience where you felt like the planning people were engaging you in a positive fashion? Are they liking the cannabis industry coming in here and bringing your plans and your economic stimulus into the city? Or, how was your interaction with the city of Long Beach?
I think a lot of it has to do with education, and that comes down to, cannabis has been such a negative thing in so many people's lives for so many years that is what other people who don't partake or who don't participate in any sort of cannabis anything, they think, oh, it's a bad thing. So I wouldn't say that they were profiling us or saying that, thinking that we were hoodlums or whatever it is, but I think that it was more of a neutral, like they don't really know what to do, what to think. They're just going to go off of what, you know, the regulations are.
Right. And so for the extraction equipment that we were talking about here, what was your experience there? Was that part of the building code and stuff like that? I mean, when you actually install all this infrastructure and equipment before you even can operate it, were there things that you did with the city about that were very specialized?
Yeah, absolutely. There's certain machines that require certain plugs, fireproof plugs. There's certain machines that can only go in certain rooms of your explosion-proof room. So there's a lot of details when it comes to the manufacturing facility itself and where certain equipment is placed and how it's placed. Certain things have to be bolted to the floor, certain things don't, things like that.
Is that the same with kitchens as well as cultivation, Stacy?
It is. I was just going to mention engineering reviews. Do you remember that nightmare? You have to have an engineering review for all your extraction equipment. It's tens of thousands of dollars for them to come in and say, yep, you're not going to blow anything up.
So you were talking about extraction, but I also know that you worked in edibles and stuff, and I know that commercial kitchens are one of the most regulated already.
Yeah.
Is cannabis on top of a regulated kitchen?
Very much so. So I've built out regular commercial kitchens that had nothing to do with cannabis and multiple ones that have to do with cannabis. And the regulations are extremely strict as far as contamination, cross-contamination, allergies, pretty much anything to do with anything in the kitchen is stricter. Your water temperature obviously has to be the same, but they just don't have any less leniency. And I would say that they have been very good to us. It's not about that they hate the cannabis industry. It's more like they're learning, like Tyler said. But also I found that when they came in and saw that we were professional, we're not making crap in our garage. This is a real beautiful commercial kitchen and extraction facility. Then we started getting a little bit more respect from them, that we weren't just, crazy.
So, I got a couple of questions for you, but this one I think is important that people hear about too. There's some security realities too that go along with operating a cannabis business for non-diversion from the state perspective, right? And then from the perspective of local law enforcement and video access and stuff. How was that experience, right? Like, I mean, did you have to get really into that as well? Is that part of the process before you can get licensed and operating?
In your application, you write a security plan. It's pretty extensive. How many cameras you have, how many motion detectors. In my facility, we had 65 cameras. You cannot have a blind spot anywhere. That's not something you're going to see in any commercial kitchen that's not cannabis. So also we have to have a DVR that records all 65 of those cameras with a certain resolution, 15 frames per minute. I'll divert to you on that one. But this is tens of thousands of dollars just in your DVR to record 90 days of continuous, like no one's there for quite a few hours of the day, but it's still recording 24/7. We didn't have armed guards, but retail does, and some larger facilities do have armed guards. But the security plan is extremely strict. You have to vault. So I had edibles, so we couldn't put our stuff in a safe. It's not a thing. We needed a walk-in half the size of this room. Well, we had to vault that. We had to turn it into a safe. Well, now we have a space between that and the ceiling, so now we need motion detectors. So every single step of it is, yes, for the state and the city, but also to protect you from being broken into, because it's a very common thing.
And then, so you're saying they dot every I and they cross every T much more systematically, programmatically, and thoroughly, right? Is where
I would say times 10.
All right, times 10.
Literally, like times 10.
So this is the big question that I think it's important. So we got maybe another 10 minutes left for us to talk, and I think there's some stuff. So Tyler, I'm going to ask you this question, right? If I had all the capital necessary, the facility, the wherewithal to pursue a license in the city of Long Beach, and you were like, oh, bro, be careful what you ask for if you want to run a cannabis business. Here's the one thing I need to tell you to look out for. Here's the one challenge that you're not going to see right now, but you need to be aware of, and you can get past it, but it's, is there a way to answer that for me?
Yeah, I think it comes down to your ultimate goals. When you're it depends on what type of facility you're starting. If you're starting a retail, I think it might be a little bit easier because you don't have to establish a brand per se. If you have a location that people can physically walk into, that is already helping establish some sort of residency when it comes to having consumers. But as a brand, coming up with all these other brands that have much more capital, even though you might have the proper capital to start the brand, all these other brands, kind of push the smaller brands down. It's like craft beer versus corporate beer. You have all these Anheuser-Busch, and they're pumping out all this beer at a very inexpensive price, And then you have your mom and pop that are pushing out a quality product that is probably a little bit more expensive due to the number of units that they're creating. You know, they're not creating hundreds of thousands of units. So establishing a brand is very difficult. If you're looking for a wholesale type of thing, if you want to create a manufacturing facility or a cultivation facility and be able to help other people's brands, that is something that's, I would think, a little bit more plausible. But starting a new brand is probably one of the hardest things to do in the cannabis industry.
And that's a great answer. And Stacey, so same question to you, right? Like, what would you say to someone? Oh, right, you know, I've done it. I work with other people who are doing it. You know, what would you say to someone? What's the greatest challenge that you could tell someone that they don't see right in the front side of it?
I would say don't underestimate how much capital you need. Exclamation point. And be very careful who you bring on as investors. I see a lot of people's business go sideways because of the investors they choose.
That's interesting, right? Because truly, capital, every project's capital intensive. I should ask you, Tyler, when you started your business, did you do it from like the bootstrap position, or did you take loans or investment?
So we were fortunate enough to have our CFO and our CEO already have a family business, and they were able to, they wanted to move in the cannabis industry. So they sold their business, and then they were able to invest in our company, which is also their company. Of course, it's almost like a family and friend business. But we thought that we would be able to get away with it, you know, for $250,000. And we were really wrong about that.
Right.
We're, you know, when you think you have enough capital, I would say, you said tenfold it, I would at least tenfold it, you know, because once you incorporate time into everything, and time is money, that is money that you're burning. And that goes back to what I said earlier about we had a building for 2.5 years that was inoperable, but we're still paying rent on it every single month. You know, so the cannabis industry gets a little bit of flack, but everyone still wants their money. That's the main part of it.
Stacey, do you want to follow up or any of that? I mean, just in thoughts about, you know, capital, right, and accessing. Do you see partnerships where there's investment capital and someone with a vision, or do you see a partnership of people who are doing it with their own self-financing? I mean, which do you see as being more challenging for an entrepreneur or someone coming up in the industry?
I think they have different challenges because bringing on an investor, you're getting married to someone that may not really care about you or your business or know how to move it forward or know anything about cannabis. That's what I see a lot. People that have money and they throw it at it and they have no idea what they're doing. And friends and family kind of bootstrapping stuff, you're now got to maybe try and fire your family. So that's kind of a problem if things go sideways with that. I had a couple meetings today and we ended up talking about investors, and one thing we kept saying is these investors come in and they say, okay, here's $1 million, but then they don't do anything to fund the progression of the business after that. And one of the analogies we used was one investor said to their people, they said, I bought you the bus, gave you the keys, and you drove it off the cliff. And the answer was, you bought me a bus and you didn't put any gas in it, so I never got it started. That's the reality, is if you get those type of investors, then you put all this into it. Like we put all our own money into it till we couldn't anymore. Then we brought somebody in who drove it into the ground. And so that's frustrating. So just be careful with that.
Right, and I gotta ask, so one of the things that we cover here in the Long Beach Collective Association has been at the forefront at the state level, right? Talking about the issue of taxation and the climate of taxation here in California especially. And so I'm gonna ask you, Tyler, just from a perspective, how much of your operation was benefited by the city of Long Beach reducing, right, the municipal tax for everybody but retail to a manageable level? But how much of your cost of goods is part of that tax? And what's your opinion right now on is it too high, and should we as an industry be looking at changing it?
Yeah, taxes is, I mean, they take up almost all of our profit normally. Unless we're producing at a very high level, the taxes just don't make small batches, if you will, worth the production. Kind of like the corporate beer versus craft beer expression earlier, you can go buy distillate from Sisu, who's a legal manufacturer, for cheaper than it costs to make it. So it, you know, taxes take up a lot. As far as, you know, on the retail side, I mean, taxes get always pushed to the retailer no matter what. So in my opinion, lowering the taxes in general will help drive people to the license spots, which would in turn help all manufacturers, all cultivators, everyone that's on the back end.
Right. And Stacey, I got to get your thoughts on this too. I mean, you obviously deal with a lot of businesses. Are you seeing people struggling with this issue right now? Is it something that is an obstacle to success for many people?
I think it's an obstacle, excuse me, to success for people, also to the industry. Because the higher the taxes are, the harder it is for people to be able to afford to go into retail and to license retail. So we're still struggling with the traditional market. Not to knock it, I was in it, I understand. But we're trying to do a safe, accessible product for our consumers. And when you have 37% tax at the end, and I'm sure most of you know, but it's tax on tax. So the cultivator grows it, gets taxed on it. Now it's an $18 product. When it goes to distributor, they're taxed on the 18. Now it's a 24. So it's just, it's
yeah, your
gross.
trim cost, Tyler, right? I mean, you have a tax before you even get to the point of moving it to the distributor to the retailer, right?
Absolutely.
Right. And it's more, it's maybe 5 times more than what you pay for the trim
Oh,
itself.
okay.
Yeah.
10. It's actually 10 right now.
It's putting it lightly.
We did a transaction today on
Haddad,
trim.
who
It was
is
$5
one of
a pound.
the board members with the Long Beach Collective Association who worked in the steering committee on taxes, he came in and did an interview with me on another show here on Cannabis Capital and explained it all to me, and I was just amazed. And he was able to actually put together a structured document that laid it all out and actually got the city of Long Beach to amenably reduce the tax rate for businesses, realizing that they're taxing us out of business. I think it's important when we're here at the Long Beach Collective Association to give Pam and give Steven some props for doing the legislative advocacy work they do for the Long Beach Collective Association, so bravo. And, I'm sure Mr. Neal will tell you that this year we're going to need to keep people activated and organized. So nights like tonight here at Cannabis Capital, but the Long Beach Collective Association Hi LBc program will be running monthly. It's getting together, talking about best practices, and watch out for the emails when we need to activate because these issues are serious. They're really actually preventing us from becoming the envisioned professional industry where we're actually able to live, thrive, and also participate in our communities and normalize our relationship with, a society that didn't quite get it, but yet 70% of the country voted for it and continues to vote for it. So don't think for a second that we should be embarrassed. We got to be loud. We got to be proud. I had a talk with one of the volunteers this evening about breaking down stigmas, and these programs are about education and best practices as much as they are about networking and sharing those best practices with each other. So Tyler, Stacey, thank you for spending some time tonight in front of this audience, giving and sharing your thought leadership, your knowledge, your experience. And everybody, I want you to know that we appreciate you coming out to Cannabis Capital to join us for these events. And please make sure on the way out that you leave your contact information so we can invite you to some comedy shows and other events that we do here for production-wise. We really enjoyed having you all here tonight, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.